Hi everyone, welcome back to My Rising Rose, where we expand our minds, unify ourselves with the cosmos, expand ourselves into connection with higher beings like goddesses and dragons, while remaining grounded and ordinary in our humanity. And it's that groundedness and ordinariness that I really want to talk about today. I'm not going to do any channeling today. I just want to talk about what the spiritual path can look like, specifically what my own spiritual path has looked like over the past 12 years or so, and especially connecting that to lineage. So for me, I've gone on a really deep, in many ways, spiritual journey over the past 12 years or so. I didn't have any background in spirituality before then. I was studying medicine for a few years, and then I studied psychology, and I was working in psychological research. I wasn't interested in spirituality or religion, and if you had spoken to me about some of the things that I talk about regularly on my channel, I would have said that those things are completely insane, and that the only people who would ever be involved in that are really deluded people. That obviously changed for me, and it changed because of my own direct experiences. I had experiences that proved to me that these things were real, and it took a long time to kind of battle with that in such a way where I could make sense of it. And one of the main things that helped me along that journey was my teacher, Fran Bennett, who had a really long and detailed spiritual journey herself, and was part of many different spiritual lineages. So she was a Christian monastic for over 20 years. She trained with many great people from different spiritual traditions all over the world. The Christian monastery that she was a part of was part of Thomas Merton's tradition, and Thomas Merton was known. He was the guy who befriended the Dalai Lama and created these conversations between Buddhism and Christianity. And so that whole monastic order was very into interfaith dialogues and exchanges. So Fran met many teachers from many different traditions. She studied with a Zen master when she was in her early 20s, and did an exchange program where she ordained as a Buddhist monk for a couple of years, and trained under Bhante Gunaratana, who is a well-known Theravadan Buddhist monk. And eventually she had a huge awakening experience that really changed the direction of her life, and she left the monastery. And it was a few years after that that I met her, and we would have these online conversations. Very shortly after meeting her, I had a Kundalini awakening. Then we cut off contact for a while, or more specifically, I cut off contact with her because I didn't like the way that she was supporting me. There was a lot of pride and ego in there as well. And then eventually I was going through some really difficult times, and I reached out to her again, and she gave me some hard truths, which were difficult to swallow, but I did swallow them, and followed her advice. And then we became really close for the following few years, and would have conversations online regularly. There'd be a lot of energy being exchanged during those times, and she came to the UK a few times where I was living, and went on retreats with her. So we had a really close relationship. I was considered a senior student of hers, and I've had experiences after her death where I was basically formally invited to teach, but through a kind of metaphysical process. So the reason that I'm talking about this is because I feel like there's a lot of miscommunication out there in the spiritual scene. I think that there's a lot of people who will have either no spiritual experience at all, or a relatively small spiritual experience, and then put themselves forward as a spiritual teacher. And I've seen that happen, and I've seen it happen like directly, as in I've seen it happen with people in my orbit, where someone who absolutely does not have the experience necessary to step forward as a spiritual teacher, and it would be a risk of harm to themselves and others if they did step forward. And there's plenty of examples of people like this who have actually become very successful. And Fran told me about one of these people. It's a very well-known spiritual teacher that she had known people who had gone to see this teacher, and I thought this teacher was pretty good. I hadn't gone really deep into them. I'm not going to say who they are because I really don't want the backlash. But I thought they were pretty good. And then she was like, oh no, like, I think it's a total scam. Like, I don't think it's real at all, which was really surprising to me. And then she gave me the reasons why. And the very simple thing that she said to me was like, well, have you done any research into this person? And I was like, well, not really. I mean, I've just like watched a few of their videos and they seemed really lovely. And she was like, well, maybe do some research. And I did do some research. I just like searched their name with cult like in it on Google, and very quickly found a lot of information about them, suggesting that they were a cult. I then also met people who knew this person in their early days, and what they shared was just, ridiculous. Like the stuff that had been going on and the behavior of this person who claims to be this like enlightened spiritual guru, and it's just like the behavior of a spoiled child. So sometimes behind the scenes there's a lot of ugliness that goes on, that the general public don't get to see, and you need a little bit of insider information to pick that out, or you need to intentionally go looking for it, because you're not going to find it through these people's own resources. And one of the things that made this person seem like they were believable was that they claimed to have a direct link to the spiritual teacher Ramana Maharshi. So Ramana Maharshi, a great Hindu mystic from the 20th century. If you don't know about him, look him up. He's widely regarded as one of the, real greats of humanity. Obviously, he also has his own flaws and quirks, which, again, Fran pointed out to me, because I was kind of all starry-eyed and just thought he was perfect or something. But again, she was like, well, you haven't really done any research into this. You're just sort of assuming. You don't know about the time that a woman got pregnant at Ramana Maharshi's ashram and he became furious with her and threw her out of the ashram, Like, nobody thinks about these saints when they're really angry or whatever, but they're all human beings. Anyway, so this person who I'll just call this false teacher, like made a claim to Ramana Maharshi's lineage, would have a big picture of Ramana Maharshi behind him, and it gave the impression that he was a legitimate part of this lineage, and that like he'd been encouraged to teach by the people in this lineage, and blah blah blah. That was what was implied by the visuals. What I've found out since is that Ramana Maharshi never claimed to have a lineage. Whenever anyone asked him, he said that he did not have a teaching lineage, which automatically tells you that anybody trying to make that claim is doing something deceptive. And even if he did have that lineage, well, he didn't tell this person to teach. And he also didn't tell this person's teacher to teach. So you need to be really careful when you're navigating the spiritual scene, because there's a lot of people out there who will use visuals. They'll wear robes, or they'll dress a certain way, or they'll do a certain thing to try to convince you of their spiritual purity. And, you know, on occasion, that's legitimate. You know, I'm not trying to say that anybody who's like wearing robes is illegitimate. There are obviously plenty of monastics out there who are legit, but not all of them. And it's important to be aware of that. Like, never ever think that people are beyond their own humanity. If you see someone acting like they're beyond their own humanity, for me, that's a huge red flag. Like, I would have no interest in listening to somebody who was acting like that, because I think it's just false, and potentially dangerous. Because the kind of person who's going to do that, they're doing it for a reason. You know, they're hiding. They're running away from their own humanity, which means that there's a strong shadow at play there that's not integrated. And that's going to be, sooner or later, it's going to play itself out with that person's followers. So yeah, you need to be careful with that stuff. But lineage can be, when it's real, obviously in this instance it's fake, but let's imagine a situation where actually there is a genuine teaching lineage. So there actually was like a teacher who was part of a lineage that goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years. They've been formally initiated into that lineage. They then teach other people. They're very careful and selective about who they initiate. They're careful and selective about who they ask to teach. That then creates like safety. That's like a quality control. And I guess that's just what I wanted to talk about, because it can be a useful thing. And there's a lot of people kind of who don't have that, who have absolutely no connection to that quality control, who are just kind of, you know, having a few experiences and then putting themselves forward as a teacher and getting really involved in people's personal lives, and have no business doing that. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my own background in that. Like, so I'm part of my own teacher, FRAUDS lineage. She was taught through dream yoga. She was taught by Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who was the primary guru of the Dalai Lama. You can look him up. He's a well-known figure in Tibetan Buddhism. She was taught by him in dream yoga. So that wasn't like a face-to-face thing, but what she told me was that for every night for 3 years, he would come into her dreams and would teach her, you know, the basics of spirituality. And she, from what I gather, she really enjoyed these dreams and these encounters with this guy. She didn't really understand who he was. She described him as like this, her teacher with like the funny hat, something like that. And then many years later, she went into a bookshop and a book fell off the shelf, and she picked it up, and it had a picture of him on it. And it said, you know, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. And it was about, I think the book was about dream yoga, you know, so that like showed her who this person was. And she had a strong link to Tibetan Buddhism. So it kind of fit. It felt like a past life was kind of carrying over into this one and getting her up to speed. She was very young when that happened. She also could see angels from childhood. I'm not fully sure about like how much teaching she received from those beings. Like she was pretty aware that most people, well, she didn't feel that it was good to share too much about those angelic realms with people. I disagree, obviously, because I'm doing that. But she felt that it kind of confused people and pulled them in the wrong direction, which I do see, in fairness. I do see that that happens. People can get very ungrounded when you share this kind of stuff with them. So she chose not to really share much about that. So I don't know a huge amount about whether she received teachings from those beings, but maybe she did. And then she entered the monastery and was there for many years, where she studied with many different people. I'm trying to remember some of their names. There's in Christian mysticism, there's something called centering prayer, and I think his name's Father Thomas Keating, who's one of the people who kind of popularized this style of Christian mysticism, and he was one of her teachers, and directly supported her and called her like a modern mystic publicly. And also the Zen master that I mentioned and Bhante Gunaratana felt that she was a stream enterer, which is the first of the 4 stages of enlightenment. And then after leaving the monastery, she became friends with Adyashanti, who's an American spiritual teacher in the non-dual scene. And he formally inducted her into his teaching lineage. So she's formally a part of many different spiritual lineages. And I worked with her for about 5 years on and off, including times where she really significantly challenged me, especially the time that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. So I feel like I've been tested to some degree. Like, I could have failed. I could have pushed her away when she tested me. But actually, what I did was managed to move through my own pride and humbly follow what she was suggesting. And to me, that's kind of passing a test. Not that she was intentionally trying to test me, but to me, that's like passing a test. And I feel like I've earned my place in this lineage by being humble enough to follow the guidance and swallow some tough pills. So I haven't been formally asked to teach by Fran. She sadly she died a couple of years ago, interestingly, just before I started my professional practice. And, you know, just to tell that story, I'd been out of contact with her for a while. And one day I was sat at my brother's house. I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. Like, a lot was in chaos at the moment. And then I had this vision of Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche standing in front of me, and like he was holding a fire, and he just he just passed it to me. And it makes me emotional talking about it. I knew that what he was saying was, we are part of the same lineage, and I'm not, you know, he died quite a while ago, so he's not physically incarnate. And he's basically saying, we need teachers. I pass it to you. It's your time. And it's hard to put something like that into words, because it didn't have words, but I think probably from my emotional reaction, you can see that this is real. And then a few days after that, I first got the news that Fran had died. which was obviously very sad and shocking, really untimely death. And then I think it was later that day, or maybe the following day, I had another vision, and this time it was Fran. And she, obviously, she's got a Christian background, right? So she, like, it's like she took holy water and she anointed my third eye. And it just had exactly the same quality. It was just like, I pass this to you. So I knew that it was time. So what I'm trying to say here is that there's a big difference between someone who's really a part of a spiritual lineage and someone who isn't. And I hope you can feel that, like, from me, like, through my energy right now while I'm speaking. Because I think we have lots of ideas about what a spiritual teacher should look like or what they should be like. And sometimes people take advantage of that. And they'll look like the real deal. But they're only looking that way because they know that it will deceive you. And that's very different to someone who is humbly moved through the challenges of being part of a lineage and moved through the challenges of their lives and matured as a human being who can hold space for you as you do the same. It's very different when someone's faking it and when someone's really living it. And the reason I'm saying this is just because I want you all to be careful about who you put your trust in. Because putting your trust into a spiritual teacher who lacks these credentials can cause you a lot of unnecessary harm. And I'm not the only person out there who's like this. There are plenty, you look around, you don't take my word for it, investigate me, investigate other people. As far as I'm concerned, anyone in my position, me or anyone else, it's on us to prove to you that we are legit and that we're capable of guiding you. And if we haven't been through it ourselves, I don't see how we have any business guiding anyone. That's my personal opinion. Otherwise, it's the best you're going to get is an academic. And that's fine. There's a lot of use in that. But for me personally, I'd never want to be guided by someone who hadn't walked the territory themselves. So this was just really, I guess I just wanted to get something off my chest. To be honest, I think that's what I'm doing with this video. I think I've just seen a lot of this for years. And there's been times where I've fallen prey to it. And to be honest, I'm angry. I'm angry at the level of deceit that exists in our world. And I'm angry that anyone would pick up the mantle of spiritual teacher in such dishonest ways. I just find dishonesty so abhorrent. And obviously I'm not perfect. I've got my moments. But I really do try to be as sincere as I can. And there's a lot of fakes out there. So, not trying to frighten anyone. I'm aware that this might evoke fear in people, but honestly, you're just going to have to get over that. Like, the world is frightening, and fear does arise sometimes. And if this frightens you, you're just going to have to move through that and, frankly, toughen up and face reality. it's much better that you face reality than push my message aside because it makes you feel afraid. And if it doesn't make you feel afraid, that's a good thing. That shows that you're probably already tapped into this and aware of the pitfalls. Sometimes we have to get burnt so that we learn not to put our hand on the stove. That's something Fran said to me after I had gone through a similar situation to this. And thankfully she was right. She said, after you burn your hand on the stove, you tend not to put your hand back again. And thankfully that has been the case. So just a little message of warning and a little bit of insight from my own personal experience over the past 12 years or so. Hope that's useful for you. Hope you're having a beautiful day. And I'll see you around soon.